Hi everyone, welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. This is your hub for engaging in deep conversations around serotonergic hallucinogens that alter perceptions, affect cognitive processes, induce mystical and spiritual experiences. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Psychedelic Conversations podcast. I have an amazing guest with me today, Greg Lake. He is the trial and appellate attorney, entheogenic church lawyer and consultant, author and co-founder of EntheoConnect.com. Welcome, Greg. Amazing to have you.
Thank you for having me, Susan. I'm glad to be here.
So let's dive in because you have an interesting title. You're a lawyer, entheogenic church lawyer and consultant. Can you tell us a bit about what it means? What do you do? What does that entail? And then we can go into your story.
Yeah, so as far as doing the entheogenic church lawyer and consultant, I mean, for the most part, that means as many people are aware, we have religious freedoms in America that, according to the U.S. Supreme Court and other statutes and state constitutions, allows us to engage with entheogenic sacraments as a sincere religious exercise is a protected activity in many instances. And so what I do is when people a lot of times are having underground ceremonies, well, I say underground, but not necessarily above board ceremonies, will come to me and ask me to actually legitimize their practice in the sense that I actually form a legal entity, a church, and then help them form their doctrine and other internal documentations in order to maximize their level of protection under state and federal laws.
Amazing. So in the US, people who are already running retreats, let's call them underground practices. And also, can you touch a little bit on what does that mean also, the underground practices of the plant medicines?
So, my theory, my belief reading the law is that anytime really you are engaged in a sacred ceremony with these sacraments, and you are being reasonably safe and you are handling the substances properly, meaning that they're not being distributed to people outside of the ceremony, it is actually a protected activity. But however, as you're aware, many people don't know the intricacies of the law. And so they don't know or understand necessarily that what they are doing is actually protected. So they come to me, and what I do is just get their paperwork together and do all their doctrine. And it gives them that feeling and added layer of protection to where now they feel better about creating Facebook groups, creating websites, getting new members to come into the ceremonies, things like that. That's what I mean above ground, is that they just extend their reach and they feel better being a little bit more public about their ceremonies.
Yeah, so this also means that you are helping them come out of the underground practicing, which is like, of course, the plant medicines in many countries are still very much illegal. So yeah, this is one of the issues that we are facing again and again and again. So it's actually amazing that US have this way of helping people to become churches. Like you said, as long as the medicine is within the space, protected, and is practiced ritualistically with respect and kind of guided. It's not going outside. And it's also, there's an integration process, and there's I mean, like churches, like I know churches, like there's one church is really famous in the US. What is it again? It's just kind of slipped out of my mind.
There's Soul Quest, maybe.
That's the one that I'm familiar with. So I'm guessing something like that. They can actually, but they've been going on for a very long time, haven't they? There's many.
They
Yeah.
they have been going on for a very long time. They actually applied for what's called a DEA exemption, which is not required to be a legal operating church. None of the laws mandate that one receive a DEA exemption in order to practice legally. However, SoulQuest has applied and to my knowledge has not received. I don't think the DEA has handed out one exemption request, which is currently being litigated in federal court. But yes, SoulQuest is a very well-known one worldwide from my understanding. But there are many more popping up now that will be doing more marketing and things. And so I imagine over the next 3 to 5 years, there will be many, many churches on par with SoulQuest operating in the U.S.
Amazing. And of course, the purpose of this church is define the meaning of church, because a lot of people probably associate this with the religious framework they have in their mind. How does that affect your work, or how do you tackle this
it's funny you mentioned that, Susan, because I do get this a lot. People are like, well, we don't want to be called a church. We're not a church. Well, I've got a couple things to say. That one, church is really just a legal term of art. And it really just defines the legal entity as it relates to like the nonprofit state existence. And so, yeah, but really, these plant medicine churches are really redefining, especially in the U.S., traditional religion, in the sense that they are not dogmatic. They are absolutely accepting of everyone. There really is no necessarily a church hierarchy. Now, there are church officials, the people who do most of the administrative work to put these ceremonies on. But probably the most important thing I think that's happening is that many, many women are starting these churches. And so, it's kind of getting rid of the old patriarchal system that we see in a lot of traditional religions, which I think is very important. And one thing that really motivates me to get involved in this space, my mother was a very strong woman, and I see a lot of women like that doing these churches. And it's just very inspiring to me to see it.
Mm-hmm. Kind of demystifying the way we associate ourselves with churches and the way that we learned, growing up. A lot of people growing up, they carry parts of themselves and the way they associate with church. So, and do you think this is going to get easier as time goes on? People will be more open to coming to these, knowing that these are not religious entities, but they are actually a space where they can come and practice, explore, and become part of the rituals with the plant medicine.
I'm already seeing it. I'm sure, as you're probably aware, traditional religions have really turned a lot of people off from even exploring their spirituality. And these places have, for a lot of people, is a great opportunity for them to do that. And, most of these retreats are centered around healing, right? And I think for people with mental health problems, they are figuring out that these places actually do offer a very ancient and sacred way for them to explore their spirituality, and in the process help out with depression, anxiety, things of that nature. I've, most retreats that I've attended, you see some of these people the very next day after ceremony, and it's just like you can just look at them and see the difference in their overall mental state and well-being. It's amazing. And again, you'll never hear me say that plant medicines are for everybody. I would never say that. I don't necessarily believe that, but I do believe that some people get an inner call to these medicines and to these retreats and ceremonies. And, I feel like eventually there will be enough in the U.S. where within a reasonable drive or travel, people will be able to engage in these ceremonies.
Amazing. Thanks for explaining and clarifying that.
Yeah.
Also, let's talk about your story. How did you come into the space of plant medicines? What was the drive, the motivation?
So it started a very long time ago, Susan. I started working with psilocybin, back in 2009, 2010. I was actually propagating them myself back then. Unfortunately, I was also in the middle of an opiate and alcohol addiction. which eventually won out. That it eventually took me over, but I'd worked with them enough to know and understand the profound spiritual nature of the substances, right, or of the plants, the mushrooms. And so I actually ended up in an inpatient rehabilitation facility for 3 years. Upon exiting, I got a really good legal job. I'd become a lawyer prior to going to rehabilitation. So I was able to get my law license back. I got a good legal job, but I was struggling financially. You could imagine, after 3 years, no work, and had these bills to pay, and was kind of struggling. So I came back to the psilocybin and just started getting, and this is with a sober mind. And so when I was consuming these sober, I mean, it was just giving me very profound direction in my life. And that direction eventually led me to write my first book on the mental health benefits of psilocybin. And almost immediately, and I had gotten signals from the plant teachers that will, you need to write this book, but that will not be necessarily your path. So like a week after I published the book, I was a man actually here in Louisiana asked me about helping him with a church. And that spurred my research into, and really my obsession with this area of the law. And so from there, it has just kind of blossomed to where I'm at today, developing EntheoConnect and all this. And, my life is kind of split into two spheres. I do, Jones Act maritime litigation 8 to 5, and then from 5 till about midnight every night, I'm in this space. But I wouldn't trade it for the world. I absolutely enjoy everything that I do. And even though I work a lot, it's just very filling or fulfilling. And I'm as happy as I've ever been.
Okay. So having the experience with these, sacred medicines has helped you to kind of use the education, the experience, and the credentials that you have to be able to somehow contribute, so that firstly, there is a harm reduction here, because once people become churches and they practice it along those lines, then it's safer than any other space that people can go to, right?
Yes.
And also, you understanding this also gives you the passion and drive. Maybe there are a lot of people who don't know they can become churches, right? So this is also another thing.
Yeah, I want to speak real quick to the safety of these ceremonies. So back in 2006, when the United States Supreme Court decided what we call the UDV case, which was the first ayahuasca church case to make it to the Supreme Court, which they decided in favor of the ayahuasca church, the courts recognized that the ceremonial context of taking these entheogenic sacraments is one of the safest settings that there is. And what has happened in the US is that many of these churches have banded together to create master organizations that promulgate safety standards. And so part of the equation here in the US in determining legality of an entheogenic church is the safety practices involved. So a lot of what I do when I'm drafting these internal documents is embodying all that safety information into the document. So that way, if it ever gets to court, the court can simply look at these documents and say, okay, they are taking the proper precautions. And a lot of it has to do with screening people properly. I'm sure, as you're aware, there are many medications and pre-existing, medical conditions that might contraindicate somebody from being able to participate. And so those types of things actually go to the legality of the church in the US. And so I just want everybody to know that these aren't, for the most, and I'm not going to speak for everyone because I'm not aware of every, people or person practicing, but for the most part, the people I work with have, sufficient safety protocols in place to screen people and to have people there to help facilitate, to make sure everyone's okay, through the course of the ceremony.
Amazing. And we are, I'm sure you are also being in the space. There are so many churches around the world. This is not new either, is it? This is not something new. No. We know, and we're aware of churches in Brazil for many years. They practiced ayahuasca as their sacrament. There's churches in Spain. churches in there's one actually really big church in Netherlands that they it's really, really big, and they're very, you know, famous also in Europe. And they also run these really safe and safe settings, ritualistic, traditional, and, you know, so that people are really familiar with how it's it's no different than going to, I'm sure when you go to Amazon, it's the settings is of course different, but again, having these available for people in those countries, because not everyone has the privilege to travel to another country that they don't speak the language, or they don't know the culture. It is part of the safety, isn't it? And this is a big mission. So when what are your thoughts on how, if this grows in the US, and a lot of the experience, say again, underground, I don't like using the word underground, because these people they are doing an amazing work, and
yes,
and we know so many of them. I know so many of them who's helped, you know, change so many people's lives. So now, once this becomes really popular in the US, how would that affect Europe? Because in the UK, I don't know how this could be, you know, received as well. But what are your thoughts on that?
You know, that's. I would hope that it would help the UK to maybe come around on the issue, and a lot of other countries. You know, I can only help but think that as these churches grow, and the number of people who have been through these ceremonies grow, and the safety data grows, that would go to alleviate harms or concerns of these other governments, right? You know, if they say, well, and I will say that we have been working hand in hand with different researchers and putting them in contact with these churches in order to help them start formulating safety numbers, because I can only feel like as those grow, that will provide even more ammunition for pro-entheogenic church people to address other governments and say, hey, you know, I presumably y'all have a freedom of religion in the UK, I would presume. Yeah. Yes. So, I mean, maybe one day with the safety data mixed with the right to practice freely, that will spur either some legislation or a court case that will, you know, one day say, yeah, you know, these practices done correctly are safe enough to where, you know, it alleviates any concerns that we might have that it would harm, you know, our citizens.
Yeah, that makes sense. In the UK, of course, we have more stricter legalization procedures. And when you talk about the entheogenic churches, what comes to my mind is that it's kind of an outlet for those who don't have the qualification. Like right now, as you're aware, mental health has been the portal for the plant medicines to come alive again. You know, there's a lot of talks about we're going through a renaissance, you know, the psychedelic renaissance, and there are loads of you know, reviving of these medicines in the mental health space, where psychologists and scientists, neuroscientists are, you know, doing these studies and researches. Now they're, you know, revived again. Non-profit organizations, like in the UK, we have Imperial College, Berkeley, we have you know, a couple more up and coming. But unfortunately, I don't know how the entheogenic church will go down in the UK, because I mean, I only, when was it? A few days ago, I read an article that Dr. Ben Sessa, he's the he was one of the leading, you know, as you.
I'm familiar with them. We're actually friends on Facebook. I've talked back and forth with him a few times.
So he's opening the first clinic, you know, psychedelic assisted MDMA, most probably, or psilocybin clinic in UK. But that's because he's a, you know, psychologist, and of course the law favors the neuroscientists and psychologists and psychiatrists and clinical psychologists. So again, what happens to the let's say again, underground practitioners, probably who spent all their lives working with these medicines, and they probably know so much, just because they are not licensed clinical psychologists. Now they're not they don't have a voice, and they cannot, because it just kind of forces them to stay underground. So that, the fact that in the US the churches are recognized, and these guys can have an opportunity, an outlet to practice in safe environments without feeling the guilt or the complications of the law. I think it's great. So you're doing an amazing job. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And I'll say this real quick. I actually read through a lot of, like Carhart Harris's and Imperial College's research. When I wrote my psilocybin book, there's a lot of studies actually cited and discussed, and I'll say this, in the regards to psilocybin, they talk about the mystical experience, which is something, an aspect of these what I call journeys that they can't really explain. That it's like we don't really necessarily understand where this comes from, but then they say, but we know there's a scientific explanation for all this, right? Well, for me, that's where these churches are kind of picking up, or what they're getting at is that this mystical experience is actually a spiritual aspect of it that has a very healing quality to it. And that's kind of where these shamans and other facilitators work at, right? In this mystical experience, mystical states. And I'll say this, like you said, someone who has served 5,000, 10,000 cups of ayahuasca and consumes a facilitator's dose, me personally, I feel safest with them because they understand the whole experience. And these people can look at you under the influence of ayahuasca and tell exactly where you're at. And a lot of them, if you're having a difficult experience, I've seen them come up and touch people or blow smoke on them and just literally calm them down completely. It's like they know intuitively exactly where you're at and exactly what will bring you back down to ground you, to calm you, to continue the experience. And so, in my eyes, that's not to take away from Dr. Sessa or anyone like that, but I do feel like a lot of these people in these churches and retreats and ceremonies actually are better facilitators of the experience than some of the medical neuroscientists and people like that.
Yeah, these are great insights. And also, like you said, you would feel safer with them knowing that they've also been drinking it for years and years.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
Yeah, when you know that these persons been through it many times. I totally understand what you mean. So this means they can have a chance and they can have a open conversations and become churches. So how many lawyers do you think like you are out there currently?
So in the United States, I think I was actually talking with another lawyer in the space the other day. I think there are 10 of us.
Wow. Who
specialize in freedom of religion as it relates to entheogenic churches, which is kind of a niche specialty. And let me say this, that kind of brings the point, I don't really charge full price or a lot for my services. A lot of the work I do in this space is service work. I do charge some for my time. I require what we call an energy exchange, just because, I need to know people are serious about this, right? Because if not, everyone who is sitting there at midnight one night thinks, oh, I want to start an ayahuasca church, call someone and get the work done. Like I require some energy exchange there. But yes, there are very few of us. And, I've thought many times about, well, should I charge a lot? Should I not charge a lot? And, to be honest with you, I kind of just let my inner spirit guide me when deciding what to charge people in this space. But most of it's out of a sense of service because, these teachers have given me so much in my life and helped me, come out of an addiction, prevent relapse, not get depressed, and I just know many people can benefit from it. So I'm trying to get it to where, and there's a balance between creating a whole bunch of churches or creating enough quality churches, and so I want to make sure the people I help are competent to do this properly. So I kind of have to strike a balance there. And my goal is, again, that, one day within a 3 to 5 hour drive, everyone in the US will have somewhere safe and sacred to go to, commune with the plant medicine.
Yeah. It's great. How, yeah, the energy reciprocation is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
How soon do you think that's going to happen? And what do you think is happening in the world, in the plant medicine space currently?
You know, I expect probably with the rate that I'm getting calls and becoming aware of people practicing, I think within the next 3 to 5 years that will be a reality with that many, you know, churches and retreats popping up. And look, I mean, COVID has really fueled this because of just the mental health toll that it's taken on people. And then the fact that I think when people finally kind of like sat with themselves, they started to realize that many of the Western medications and treatment they had been getting were not actually really working for them. And so I think that's been fueling people to seek alternative remedies. And, you know, a lot of people probably just end up researching these things and end up seeing the plant medicine and maybe watching some YouTube videos and think, man, this is something that might work for me. But yeah, I mean, we see so many new people entering the space every day saying, you know, I'm willing to try this. I've been suffering for a long time. And yeah, so a lot of people are kind of at wit's end, you know, and that's how they end up there. And for the majority of people, it works. Yeah. It really helps them.
Yeah, I think it's very true. And these are my observations as well. Being in the mental health space myself, you know, as a holistic psychotherapist, I think I am recognizing that a lot of people who even 2 years ago or even last year wouldn't be interested in psychedelics or any plant medicines seem to be more open now currently than ever before. And like you said, I think it was Michael Pollan's book that he says, you know, SSRIs were, you know, developed years ago. I think it was 1980s. And it's interesting that how modern medicine is going at such high, you know, pace into creating incredible ways that, you know, they are changing lives with, you know, with the modern medicine. And yet when it comes to the mental health, it's so way behind. There's not much out there. I think the only legal psychedelic I know now currently is ketamine, right? It's just been available in a few countries under the, you know, under the mental health guidance, and clinical psychologists do that. MDMA, I know, is on the second phase, but like you said, it is still very much, you know, far, far away, seems like that. But I think having the COVID pushing people to the edge and the spike in the, you know, depression and anxiety levels, all of that is going to bring us to more questions around psychedelics and how we need to be more sensible, and also how can we make it available on a wide range than ever before, right?
Yeah. Go ahead, Susan. I'm sorry.
No, go, please. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So to that point, you know, I here's how I kind of see all this. When I hopped into the space, I was obviously very research oriented, even though I viewed like psilocybin as like a very spiritual type thing. I was very research oriented because my naive view at that time was that this is what's going to lead to overall legalization and acceptance. And I still believe it plays a huge, huge part. You know, kind of like you said, Michael Pollan's book is all about the research. And, you know, just the sheer number of people that I know that have now tried psychedelics because of that book, you know, people who otherwise were completely against it. I mean, it plays an important role. But when I got into this plant medicine church space, I realized the potential for this also to play a very significant role in softening people's, you know, hardcore viewpoints against psychedelics and entheogens. And so I kind of see in America, we have this plant medicine church space. We have the research, which is going on worldwide. And then we also have these decriminalization movements that are going on, which DC just decriminalized most plant medicines, kind of all working in tandem together to soften views around, you know, psychedelics and entheogens. And I can't help but think that that will have a worldwide impact eventually, probably within the next 10 years. You know, people viewed these things as very, very dangerous. And oh my God, like you might take, you know, psilocybin or some LSD and just completely lose your mind. Well, that's kind of being shown to be false. And I think as people can take themselves away from that viewpoint of this being dangerous and, oh my God, that kind of softens it. And eventually many people decide that they actually want to try and discover these things. And then for the most part, once they do, they realize, wow, this has great potential to help me in life. And that's kind of where I see it going eventually. And again, I support all three of those movements. Even though I exist mostly in this church space, I absolutely support all the research that's being done. And two, the research plays an important part legality wise in the US for the churches, because again, part of a court's analysis is the safety and efficacy. Well, maybe not efficacy per se, but safety of these substances. So if we talk about like a psilocybin mushroom church in the US, well, the number of clinically administered doses over the last 5 to 10 years is quite a few, with no remarkable safety issues noted. So those studies would be very good evidence to enter in a court case to show that, hey, these things are safe. So it really, this research, and there's a lot of people in church space that don't like the research, they don't like the science, but it really plays an important role in what we're doing all around. And I realize that and support it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we need to now have an open mind going forward, because I believe that, having a radical opinion on something like, how the war on drugs from the 50s, what happened in the 50s with psychedelics, it shaped the way people associate with psychedelics. And a lot of people, there are many types of people who, there's one that disregards it completely. They don't have they don't want to have any understanding or even open-mindedness towards it. And then there are many, again, using them recreationally, underground. And then there's this, like you said, for healing purposes. It's almost like we've been divided in so many different communities looking at psychedelics and with different perspectives, right?
Yes.
It's crazy.
And look, there are people who need healing that probably would be best served going to Dr. Sessa. There are people who need healing that would probably be best served by going to Soul Quest, et cetera, et cetera. I always say this: people, if they need the medicine, if they need these substances, need to meet it halfway or meet it where they're at. And we're all at different spots, and this goes for the church scene too, is that, there's some churches where it's expensive and you're, laying on a real nice mattress in a room, that's, and then there's some that are less expensive where you're out in the woods by a fire, but there's different people for all those spots. And there's different people that, again, are more science oriented that would be better served by going to an actual clinic. And so I think all those options should be available for people to go meet the substances where they're at.
Yeah, I agree. And also, we should never dismiss the scientific researches, like you said, because they have been helping us. Maybe that's because why some of the skeptics are now open to psychedelics, because of, having these scientists and psychologists and, neuroscientists coming together, just doing a lot of work. And I read, when was it? I think I read an article where the reason that psychedelics are revived again, because there's a generation of, the generation of the 50s are now kind of dying, and we have this new emerging, fresh generation of people who have more open-mindedness towards psychedelics, and they are also in spaces like research, science, like yourself, lawyer, where they can use their credentials and take psychedelics to a more safer and also to a place where we can all kind of associate it with as a tool rather than negative. We still have a lot of stigma around these psychedelics, isn't it? So what are your insights about how do we overcome or at least get closer to a place of accepting them as a tool, in whether it's mental health, like you said, whether it's camping in woods or some church or clinic,
So, I think the research, the research is all about numbers and data and figures. They need to keep pushing ahead, because obviously those, for the hardcore skeptics, those numbers, data, figures, FDA approvals, all that goes to, help overcome them. And then I think, on the church side or on the spiritual end of this, I think, and what we're going to be doing at my website is really tracking stories of people, tracking stories of people who come to these ceremonies and retreats in a bad spot, and track their progress, through engaging with the plant medicines and ultimately improving their lives. We live in an age where people get a lot of information on YouTube, and if there's a lot of inspirational, good stories about people, overcoming adversity through engaging the plant medicines, I think that will also help to soften people's views, and then obviously with the decriminalization measures here in the US, what I would say to that is, like, Denver's had psilocybin, has been decriminalized for, I guess a little bit over a year. And look, the sky hasn't fallen out of this, hasn't fallen. It's everything is still fine. No hardcore incidents of people harming themselves. And that's another thing, a lawyer the other day told me that 2 years ago, they had figured that maybe like 150,000 cups of ayahuasca were served in the US without any major incident, and so for me, I think a lot of it's the safety. I think when people realize that these things are actually, if done properly and with respect, safe, reasonably safe. And so that's my thing. I think people mostly associate it with danger, bad, these things could ruin your psyche, or, you could jump off a building. I think when people understand that that's not really the nature of what's going on, that will help to soften.
Yeah, I guess in time, again, to undo the stigma or the negativity that's been wired in the psyches for so many years, I think it's going to take some time. And also it's going to take a lot of people who are in the space, who are practicing it safely, to share their experience. And I know it's happening already. Like if you look at YouTube, there are so many channels of education, and so many people are talking about it. Also, let's talk about your EntheoConnect website. Okay. So how did that come about? What was the inspiration on that?
So it actually happened the first. Okay, so it's kind of crazy. I met a guy on Facebook out of Corpus Christi, Texas, and we started chatting back and forth. It was right after I published my book, and he was like, "Hey, I've been working with these medicines. They're awesome. It's been helping me." And then one night he messaged me. He's like, "I'm having a hard time. I feel like I'm about to relapse." So I called him on the phone, and we talked for maybe 2 hours. I talked him off the ledge, just kind of shared my experience and talked him out of it. So about a week later, he's like, "Look, meet me in Texas at this entheogenic church I go to. I want you to come to our sacred ceremony." So I go to the sacred ceremony, and while I'm walking out, we kind of hatched the plan for this website just right there. And from there forward, we just, took action every single day to get all the development costs done, concrete all the ideas, and just kind of took it from there. And now we're actually best friends and business partners. And so it's great. But yeah, we realized that, at that time I had been doing some work with churches, and I said, "Look, this thing is much bigger than I ever thought. Like I'm getting all these calls, like this thing is huge." And, people need to get, there are people who feel called, who need to realize where these places are, because many people are out there suffering, needlessly, that would be willing to come to an entheogenic church, but just have no idea the existence of or where they're at. And so that's how we hatched this idea of creating EntheoConnect, where we would, create an exclusive set of listings of, and it's not just going to be the US, abroad too, but mostly centered towards churches in the US, where people can come on, create a profile, interact with other people in the space, and then find through the profiles of the ceremonies and retreats what best fits them. And so that's how we kind of hatched it. And obviously with my connections in the space, I'll be able to get a good set of listings there where people will have good options to engage with the plant medicine if they feel so called.
Safe and reputable
Yes.
cases that would be on display on your website, where people can find out and also talk to other people who's been there.
Yes.
Read the reviews and type of thing.
Yeah. So we will have a star rating system on the profiles of each retreat. But again, we will have a user forum where people can start threads and kind of like a Reddit type thing and discuss, what really anything, as long as it's positive. That's one thing. We're not going to allow people to be negative. We really want it to be a digital sacred space of love and support where people feel protected. But yes, I mean, if someone had a good or bad experience or a medium average experience at a retreat, we definitely encourage them to discuss that, in the forum. And so, yeah, like I said a little bit earlier, people need to meet the plant medicine, either where they're at or halfway. I'm hoping through EntheoConnect, people will be able to kind of discern if it's their first time going somewhere, whether that place might or might not be a fit for them.
Sure. Yeah. I really like the idea. And also, I like the word EntheoConnect, and you call these sacred medicines entheogens. So tell us a bit more, if in case the listener don't know, what are entheogens?
Yeah, so when I published my first book, it was entitled Psychedelics and Mental Health, Psilocybin. And basically the difference between the two words is this: psychedelic more or less means mind revealing. Okay. Kind of implying that, this whole experience exists somewhat in the mind, right? Well, entheogen means basically awakening the divine from within. And so for me, that has more of a spiritual connotation, which fits my view of the medicines, which I'm not saying is right or wrong, but my view as a spiritual tool, the entheogen more fits my view on them. And entheogen is a relatively new term being used in regards to these substances. I mean, I don't know the exact age, but it's fairly new. And for me, it just, in what we're doing at the website, it more so fits that paradigm. And look, I know people in the church community that won't say the word psychedelic. They think that it's so attached, I guess, to a lot of the recreational use, that they feel like using that word cuts down on the legitimacy of what the churches are doing. And look, I understand that viewpoint. I'm not that hardcore about it. But my personal preference, and obviously for our website, was entheogen, or a play on, entheogen.
Okay, cool. Recently, I watched a webinar from Rick Strassman, the author of the DMT, the spirit molecule. He said that he prefers to use psychedelics as as to revealing the mind. So he just said that's the way that he prefers it. But I understand what you mean when some people see it so sacred, these medicines, that they don't even want to associate it with psychedelics, right? So yeah. So I mean, that's fine.
I look at them very sacred as well. I absolutely do, and I respect them as such. But again, look, it's all a matter of, in a way, I feel that these things are so sacred that they really escape and a lot of times the experience escapes human language, the ineffable part of the experience. So, while we're sitting here putting names on them, really for me, much of it escapes human language. So an attempt to even really describe it with language is still missing the mark. So, that's.
Yeah. I think eventually people will come to understanding in their own unique way, right? Because we all, people who have had the experience with the plant medicines, they always find their sweet spot of how they are connecting, which makes it very unique and individual. Yes. You're right. Let's talk about your books. You've authored second one now, right? You got second book. Is it finished?
So second book is in final stage of editing. I hope to have it out here in the next few weeks. I actually busted the rough draft out in a week now, and so my second book is on the law of entheogenic churches in the U.S. And I'd obviously been very involved in the research and talking every day this area of the law. So when I went to write my rough draft, it really flowed quickly. It's kind of a short book, about 90 pages. It's really just kind of a rough overview of the law in this area. And what I wanted to do was just kind of boil as much of the legal language down to layman's terms, and misspell some or dispel some common misconceptions with the law in the U.S. And so that way people who are interested in it will be able to read it and have a general grasp of it, and will understand the true nature of it, as opposed to what a lot of people view, which is not necessarily correct.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great service.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And your first book was about is it more about your story or?
So I do very briefly touch on my story in the first introductory chapter, and it's just brief. And as my story related to that, I was in a very hardcore inpatient rehabilitation community for 3 years. And a lot of people died, overdoses, suicides, things like that, who were taking, and they were basically taking SSRIs and these other drugs, which the facilitators at or the administrators at the facility were real quick to prescribe them, these things. But, once I kind of got out of there, I used to go back all the time to give back, give speeches, things like that. And I just couldn't help but think, I wonder how many of these people would have benefited from having, a guided psilocybin session, as opposed to these other medicines, because there's so many traumas that these people were carrying around that simply talking in a process group or one-on-one with your counselor will really only scratch the surface of. And so that's kind of what spurred me to write the first book, just to play my part in kind of bringing all this to light. And spreading the message, which was the research at that time. These great numbers that were being produced in these clinical trials. I mean, I thought it was awesome. And so I just, with that book, wanted to create one resource with all the research up through February 2020. So that way, and I had been reading articles all online that were just really scattered and, some covered the same studies and some are not. Sometimes you have to read halfway down the article to realize that this is a study that you had already, were aware of. And so I said, well, I think that this space would be served by someone collecting all this and putting it into a, one resource organized, which I do like one for depression, one for addiction, one for end of life terminal cancer, and then one with, normal healthy subjects. So that way it just kind of organized it. People who are interested in different ones can flip right through it. And so that's how that one came about, that first one, which, I researched and wrote that one in about 35 days. Once I started writing books, I started realizing I love it. In that when I sit down and literally write the first sentence, it's over with. Because there's a lot of self-doubt and fear. But once I get that first sentence on paper, it's like it won't bother. I can't really relax till it's done. So expect many books from me in the future. I love it. I realize that it does play an important role in this conversation. And so I'm going to continue along that path.
Amazing. Great service. Mm-hmm. So it's all about, having the education and being informed when it comes to these substances so that, going future, a lot is going to shift very quickly. We can all tell that by the way it's going with the mental health, and also all these psychologists and psychiatrists coming together. In some of the European countries also are really open to the treatments, the psychedelic assisted therapies, and so a lot is shifting very quickly before our eyes. So I think this will help people get ready, get informed, and make their own decisions based on that.
We are a very special place in time and history as it relates to these substances and the treatment of mental health. I'm just very grateful to be a part of it. And, when I came out of treatment and saw where it was, I said, man, I want to be a part of this. I want to play a part because, just speaking from my own experience, I know and am aware of how helpful these can be. And obviously, in my view, these, especially the natural ones, were placed here for our guidance. And so, yeah, anything I can do to help spread the message, to help connect people with this space is kind of my forte. And, that's what I do on the daily.
Yeah. I think there is something special and unique is going on among the plant medicines users, that once they receive the benefits, they take it on as a mission to spread the message and really share, because there's this, there is this human part of us. We're wired to help and to guide and to touch other people's lives. So it's really, really amazing to just see that unfold going forward. Thank you so much, Greg. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. And thank you for sharing your insights and the mission that you're on. It's amazing. Great service. Just before we go, what would you say as your closing comments, and anything else that we missed out maybe you want to just touch on?
Well, I just want to say, one, I'm grateful every time to speak with you, Susan, and don't ever hesitate to reach out. I'd be glad to come back on anytime. And for people who might be kind of opposed to the thought of psychedelics, entheogens, or plant medicines, I just encourage those people to do reading, go on YouTube, see some of these videos. I mean, it really helps people. And if you're out there suffering from an addiction or mental health crisis, again, do your research. This might be something that absolutely could help you. Speaking from experience, I have seen very dramatic turnarounds within the course of 1 or 2 ceremonies. And, for a lot of people, it's most definitely worth a try. But as always, do your research and make sure it's a proper fit for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. I will see you on the next part. And until then, stay safe, be informed, be educated. It's not for everybody, but do share whatever you learn. I think we're in a time of, I call it the global reset. The pandemic has pushed us to the edge of looking and asking and seeking for more, and asking these hard questions when it comes to our, psyche and our psychology and our mental health and well-being. I think it's also pushing us to take the agency to become self-agent and claim sovereignty in healing ourselves with the plant allies. So that's the mission. I think that's the message right now. As Dennis McKenna says, they are our allies going through this transitioning. So again, thank you for tuning in. Thanks, Greg. Always a pleasure. See you on the next podcast soon.
Yeah, thank you, Susan.
Okay, bye for now. Much love, everyone. Bye-bye. Stay tuned. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.